Let's start off with a couple poems from the mid-90s. Okay. This one is a poem about a Chagall painting, and the name of the painting is Apparition of the Family. His family calls from a fiery dusk at the back of his brain. He hears the lilt of fiddle tunes played by a woman in flight above Vitebsk. The violin music pours sweetly through his thoughts. People from his past and present dance free of gravity in a haze of burnished vermilion that halos the family home. He looks away from his easel painting, suspended in the night sky, and peers down over the village from a weightless blue chair and sees Bella in her youth, her hair black and flowing. All those he had loved float there in lamplit haze in the summer night. His dead parents and living daughter fly where an angel watches in the joyful atmosphere. Nostalgia turns his head until he can see all their faces. This next one is a poem by Edvard Munch, who painted The Scream and a lot of other kind of morose paintings. And this is one of his lighter-hearted paintings about the end of an affair. This is Evening, the Yellow Boat. He has turned his back to the distant pier where a man and woman forsake a yellow boat throbbing on the horizon. He remembered the afternoon along the coast at Crigero when she gazed out on the bay and the salt wind blew her long blonde hair toward him like strands of sunlight. She stared into the watery distance past their nights in bed at the tide receding. Locked in the past, she recalls her soft pink mouth and the sway of her body by glass gray water. Her face appears a moonstone in his thoughts as the rocky shoreline winds away. The boat is vacant like the summer sky mirrored in a pale sea. And this next one is about written about a year ago about the beginning of our quarantine for COVID. This is COVID-19 days. I don't need any more bad news. A plague is breathing through the Emerald City, where the people walk under a chalky sun, growing sickly with the demise of wonder. Refugees from the 9 to 5, they spend their free time in limbo, in these charcoal sketch streets from a Russian novel, protracted and oblique. This is my 5th day free of the medication that sends enthusiasm in modulated lightning to wake me from black chasms. Hospital wards are choked, the stricken bodies outnumber remaining beds, and the pandemonium of dying patients has now spread to baseball stadiums. A forgotten epidemic from 100 years ago trains funereal eyes at the newest panic, overwhelming surprise. Body bags collect outside the buildings trembling with ventilators' mercy and wait to be carried away to infinity. This one is something I wrote in the late 90s about walking home from work. This is June twilight walking home. So many lives in my head floating like radio songs from the cars driving north towards the day's dimming azure. The planet turns its face away from the sun this chill late spring evening, leaving violet mountains to sink in blue-black night. At the top of the hill, I look west at the jagged body of the Olympic range, fading out, and I am alone with memories. I think of the beguiling smile of the childlike woman I used to lie over and the heat of her flesh together in her bedroom. Now I recall years I gazed at a morning sky until it began to crack like a marrow in my withering youth. The song I hear on the way home falls down 7 stories, but will rise again like a lark's voice in the next morning. Oh, okay, I know where I am. Now, this next one is set in Cincinnati in the late 60s. It's the summer of 1969. At twilight, my brother's speed freak friend would obsessively sweep the sidewalk and the asphalt in front of Bill's head shop. People in flowing hair and denim, wire-rimmed glasses and open faces would pass by on the way to Calhoun and Vine, the vortex of Cincinnati's hippie scene. Some spoke of communes and cities where freaks weren't hassled. Others couldn't see past 30 and heard the nightly news rumbling apocalypse. One July night, I sat on the floor of the Black Dome after taking Trilithon to come down from my last acid trip. On stage, Balderdash played, the bass sounding from a bottomless chasm, guitar notes intersecting and stretching endlessly, and the singer howling from a demented world. Through my brain streamed the cartoon faces of the dead, lunatics raving in comic book purgatories, and an old woman with black stars for eyes. The rest of that summer, I drifted in clouds of hash smoke. After going straight, I saw blue sky seething and heard dark meanings echoing in street laughter. That autumn, I entered a room of flowers where an Eastern master gazed from a portrait on the wall. I received 2 syllables of Sanskrit, a guide to the calm waters and silent heaven within me. This next one is also set in Cincinnati from about 1964 to 1969. 1964 was the year we moved from Maryland to Cincinnati. So you'll see a little bit of that reflected in here as well, but it's mostly about Cincinnati. This is called Charmed Estuary. Through my 20s, the Chesapeake would reach out its tidewater arms in the waking dark before day. The sunlight upon it infused with the memory of my sister's blonde hair. Almost 17, I entered a city of hills bordered by the serpent's coil of the Ohio River. With my family, I rode through the sallow-faced Bavarian streets, past the weathered brick of Catholic churches, spiring the lucite gray of overcast Midwestern skies. One summer, 5 years later, I found myself in Mount Airy Forest, wrapped in a murky charcoal night. A hound was tracking me with hallucinogen breath, strobe eyes, and the snarl of 1,000 out-of-tune violins. I waited until his howl stopped ringing in my bloodstream and finally came, fractured, to a white pastel sun filling an upstairs room in my parents' home. I would never return to that laughter under the green oaks along the shores of that gull-voiced estuary after my sister left us. That one was written for a class we took on Dante's Inferno, so I think you could see a little bit of that with the hound tracking me with the hallucinogen eyes and all that. Okay. All right, this is another one. It's partially set in Cincinnati. It's about a time that me and some friends, I was going to Hanover College, and in Ohio, you could drink 3-2 beer. So you were all 18, so that's where we just went to Cincinnati for a weekend, and I didn't tell my parents, and just went there to get drunk one Saturday night is basically the story there. This is called Hard Traveling. I remember that Saturday, April 1966. Some college friends and I were hitching to Cincinnati, near where my parents lived. As we left Hanover, Indiana, the radio was playing Walking My Cat Named Dog. Its harmonica riff, a slice of sun through cloudy sky. I don't know what my father was doing that weekend, probably listening to Joe Nuxall, the voice of the Reds, and cheering them on. Meanwhile, my mother would shut the door against his stadium interludes and turn up the Mozart on her stereo. We had come to get drunk on 3-2 beer and dance the alligator at the Nebish. That night, we caroused our 18-year-old bravado on the street until a patrolman suggested that we join the Army. It was strange to be 8 miles from my parents and unacknowledged. We slept in a $10 a night hotel in a neighborhood of grimy red brick. The next day, I wished I could call my dad as we stood in a flood tide rain in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, and tried to hitch a ride west. Finally, a car splashed to a stop. We got in, and the Walker brothers were singing, "The Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore." Okay, about 2 or 3 years ago, about 3 or 4 actually, I read the novel Frankenstein, and I always kind of felt sorry for him, at least until he started to kill all those people, then not so much. But I imagined him for this poem as working in a baseball stadium where he could be sort of out of sight to some extent, so he wouldn't cause too much trouble. So this is, I call this Ballpark Frankenstein. Maybe you've seen him in left field during batting practice, shagging would-be homers, lumbering toward the white spheres, flashing out at him like lasers. He likes it best when shadows fall long and cool upon the manicured green, to provide a peaceful haven where his dread visage can't be seen. Made as he was from the cold flesh of the dead, he will come alive when the scoreboard charges his brain with the electric message that his team is ahead. See him far out in the bleachers under a bucket hat, drinking cheap red wine, Ballpark Frankenstein. He used to work in concessions carrying metal trays of peanuts and root beer, but beneath a long-billed cap, his face always inspired fear. He likes the rainy evenings he spends on the ground crew, rolling the tarpaulin like a heavy shroud on base paths under the liquid gray heavens. For love of the game, he stays on in this loud stadium, a continual fright who could be an icon only on Halloween bobblehead night. See him far out in the bleachers under a bucket hat, drinking cheap red wine, Ballpark Frankenstein. Okay, this one is about a job I had, from about 1995 to 2001, and it was as a market research telephone interviewer, and sometimes I would have conversations, of course, with my coworkers at work, but sometimes I'd be on the same bus line as I'm going to work and leaving work. So this is about some kind of deep conversations we had back then. This is called Deadpanning to the Great Unknown. We were bussing through a gray-lit corridor of hemlocks on the way to work at a market research firm. In a Seattle suburb, the locals called Deadman's, which is actually Edmonds. Do you have a spiritual side, John? Mark queried. We only have 5 minutes, I replied. It would take a half an hour ride on public transit to explain it all. And besides, I haven't thought much about God or the afterlife since my 20s. I'm sure you'll start to think about those subjects in a few years, Mark averred. as he tugged at his salt and pepper Walt Whitman beard and then mentioned his Jewish Buddhism. Soon I was looking at a blue computer screen filled with psychographic questions. For instance, I believe that the world was created in 6 days, like the Bible says. An elderly man I reached in southern Illinois said yes, but they were biblical days. He was polite, but his voice conjured Interstate 70 with its billboards hectoring, "Come to Jesus." I listened to the Reverend Homer Simpson, the caller next to me joked. "I find spiritual truth in Metallica," another exclaimed, as he got up from his chair and pantomimed the guitar solo to Enter Sandman. Meanwhile, a slender young woman with flower-painted fingernails was telling a respondent about her adorable tomcat, and a born-again caller commiserated about school prayer in the middle of a survey with a like-minded soul in Kansas. A man in Rochester, New York said, "I sounded like an undertaker when I read the Genesis question to him." The fir trees through the window had dimmed, and it was now 9 p.m. The college student caller left to catch his ride under the dark mauve sky with, "Do you think your Marilyn Manson t-shirt will get you into heaven?" reverbing in his ears from earlier in the day. And the Modigliani girl went home to smoke weed and watch Animal Planet with her cat. Mark's query returned as I waited for my bus in the suburban night streets, but I reached the same conclusion that had stymied me countless times. The ultimate mystery is not solvable by any human mind. So why waste these quicksilver hours angsting about it? But somehow I knew I would. How am I doing for time? Leopoldo, how am I doing for time? I'll keep reading.
You have been at it for about 17 minutes.
Okay, so I guess I can read a couple more.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Okay. This next one will be about when I was a kid in Maryland. And yeah, we used to have, our parents would always make us eat vegetables. And the deal there was that I couldn't watch TV until I finished eating my vegetables. So there was a show I really liked back then called Rin Tin Tin. It was about a army troop that had a mascot had a German Shepherd for a mascot. So this is called Learning to Eat Vegetables in the 50s. I remember my parents used to say, "No Rin Tin Tin until you finish your sauerkraut. Long sour strings palatable as kelp, acidic and fearsome as jellyfish that lurked when I swam in Chesapeake Bay." In those days, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, and lima beans filled the dreaded portion of my plate, but I always managed to finish before the cavalry charge. Okay, the next one, well, we had an assignment in one of my classes at the UW Extension, and we were supposed to put a figure from classical mythology in a Seattle location. So this is Medusa at Coleman Dock. Medusa walks off the night ferry from a weekend of Lollapalooza. Daughter of Puget Sound, she makes tresses, her snake tresses glow fluorescent green as she ambles along in Doc Martens of adder skin. Her hairdresser Athena envied her beauty and whited her face with makeup, among other sorceries. She hides her stare behind dark glasses. She is not looking for a Perseus, and she has already seen a Pegasus on the cover of an old Steve Miller album. So, do I have any more time, or should this be it? Read another one. I'll keep on reading till you stop me. Okay, this is another one about Seattle.
19 minutes.
Okay, I'll read one more then. Okay, and this is about something I wrote in the mid-90s about Seattle. And this is about Ballard pretty much. And the Ballard's just not the same as it used to be then. So you have to take that into account. This is called The Moon at Market and 15th. And there's an opening quote that I heard on the bus and was, every car going to Ballard after 9 p.m. needs a muffler. Cars roll in from Magnolia over the Ballard Bridge, past the neon mantra flashing, add Bardol, add Bardol. My eyes catch on the September moon, a freshly washed plate hung over Denny's. My mind on the sublime, I walk north toward St. Al's, the home of Tuesday night bingo. A juggernaut of skateboarders approach on 15th, where my face drifts lunar reflections and smashed beer bottles that line the gutter. Turning onto my street, I can hear the cobalt night pierced by a car in need of a muffler. Okay, so that's 20 minutes. Okay, this one is a poem I wrote for a Yuba House class in 2008. It was a class in Jack Kerouac. I think I've read a few from that class before, but you've never heard this one before. It's about it's about my siblings when we were really young, lived in Maryland, and we had some aunts and uncles who lived out west, and we wanted to go there and at least visit. So it's called Dreaming Westward. The universe is an angel, except in the sweating heat of Tidewater, Maryland, where my sister and I wash dishes in the evening, dreaming of mountain flower breezes below the snow-wrapped peaks of Colorado. My Uncle Tom drove his 56 T-Bird from Denver to our Baltimore suburb in 1959. He dressed in button-down collar, striped shirts, and chinos like the Kingston Trio. That's how I wanted to look after tiring of combing my hair in a greaseless cowlick attempt at a pompadour in a 9-year-old's homage to Elvis. Why did my uncle want to drive the flatlands across the 1,000 miles eastward from the mythic blue-jawed Rockies we had yet to see? In 1964, we moved to Cincinnati, city of local unpronounceable German beers with their grimy brick breweries smoking in the downtown river basin. And I only wanted to go further west. There, a few years later, I began to think of California, of an album cover of Joan Baez standing on a green headland in Carmel, plucking a nylon string Gibson. Her soprano floating above the slate-colored roar of the Pacific. All those place names, Monterey, Big Sur, Marin County, shimmered in a dream of a dawn gray journey where I arrived with the sun, a lone gold trumpet crying out east of the fog that shrouded the jazz cities of the Bay. And take a couple phrases from Carol. Thank you. This is about the first year or so I was in Seattle in the late 70s, and about some friends I knew back then. It's called The Green Chair and the Miller High Life Glass. I hope no one kamikaze strafes your apartment. It's so dreary, my girlfriend groused. She had wanted to go to Vito's for dinner, but we were both on SSI and mendicants of the food stamp culture in 1977, when I first lived in Seattle, so I was wary of expense. Later, we headed into the March wind on Madison Street toward downtown and the ragged yellow banner of Birchfield twilight blowing above Elliott Bay. The photo on your Metro Pass makes you look like you just got off the swing shift at a concentration camp, she remarked as we waited at 2nd and Union for our bus to Tukwila. Perusing that picture years later, I would say it made my unshaven face, gaunt on Ellaville, appear like an like an apprentice to an anorexic werewolf. Back in my kitchen, I reached for the Miller High Life glass, but fumbled it and watched that vessel from Woolworths shatter at my feet. Then I went into the main room and listened to my portable GE radio while reclining in the green upholstered chair, easy chair I bought the August before. A few weeks earlier, my girlfriend nodded off on her anti-seizure medicine and burned a hole in the armrest with her cigarette. The soft rock station was playing Barry Manilow's Trying to Get the Feeling Again, soothing me with his plaintive flute intro I had heard on the airplane headphones when I flew out here. After my girlfriend and I broke up, we swept aside the shards of our downbeat time together by telephone. Other friends from the day treatment program we were both in would visit then, and we'd talk about Pink Floyd and paranoia. Sometimes when I hear the Manilow song unexpectedly, I see her and other faces I knew when I first roamed these streets, under long gray clouds like apparitions above the 47th parallel. Thanks.
Thank you, John.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if anybody remembers, early in the year, we did some spoken word, we had a spoken word night, and I kind of read this really atrocious thing about the time I was busted for possession of marijuana back when I was 22 in Cincinnati, Ohio. And just like, I wasn't prepared, so it didn't really come off too well. But this one is something I wrote for a class I took this fall at Hugo House. And this is sort of like the sequel to it when I actually had to spend like 12 days in jail for that, you know, which is kind of funny because now it was a felony back then, and now it's like you can't get arrested for it anymore. Because Hamilton County Purgatory, he would have convicted Jesus Christ too, the 30-ish correction official explained when he saw me enter the third floor of the Hamilton County Jail. I had just come from the Common Pleas Court of Donald White, where I was found guilty of possession of marijuana, still a felony in 1970. I guess I look innocent in my suit and tie and Ivy League short hair. I thought I would get probation because I was going to college. And that's what I told him. So you're smarter than the average bear, he shot back, using the culturally dated TV lingo typical of the Ohio River Valley. Then a guard escorted me to my cell, and I met the other occupant who was waiting to be remanded to a hospital for the criminally insane. Other detainees drifted into my cell over the next 12 days. Some would be going to the Ohio pen. Some asked if I had brought any weed with me. Of course I hadn't, since I was smarter than the average bear. During that time, I met an assortment of interesting people. One of them was in for smuggling. He was from my high school and a first-string member of the basketball team. He told me about my senior class president who got busted with two others smashing a plastic statue of a llama in a city park. The llama was stuffed with packets of hashish. Another was a member of a motorcycle gang who discussed the merits of eating grasshoppers. One got drunk and forged a check. One day, the warden let us watch an old black and white B movie from the 40s. In it, a gang of convicts were on a train, chugging over an elevated railroad bridge when one of them was thrown from one of the cars. Everyone cheered. On Sundays, Top 40 radio was piped in over the public address system. Melanie wailed "Candles in the Rain" while someone said, "That white girl sounds kind of weak. Why can't they play Aretha?" Then Norman Greenbaum was singing "Spirit in the Sky." I closed my eyes and saw myself in a dark earthen cellar, looking up at a door flooding with white light. It reminded me of reading Pilgrim's Progress, where the pen and ink sketch sun seemed to expand at the end of every chapter. Then one day the guard said I was getting out tomorrow. The next morning, the key arrived in the form of a probation officer. It seemed the curse of Harry Anslinger was beginning to lift, and the 1930s era marijuana laws were receding. Then my father arrived and we rode into a pulsing March morning of rainy light. After 2 weeks in windowless halls, it lifted me in a rhapsody. That night, the purgatory of jailed voices vanished from my sleep. Thank you. This is something I wrote for my Yugo House class last quarter, and it's about the neighborhood where I live, which is Winona and Aurora, which Winona is only about a block from 73rd, so I usually call it 73rd and Aurora, but it's actually Winona and Aurora. And it's about just what it's been like the last couple of years with COVID, and also it was tearing down old houses and putting up condos, like all Seattle's doing. So this is called Aurora North Autumnal. The leaves of the red gum trees wave their red flag messages of carbon monoxide stain of Aurora's death wage. Gas-powered blowers send throngs of October foliage towards smog-masked halcyon of the season's passage. Summer's nightingale melodies are long since diminished in pulsing electronic beats of the day's drunken finish. There's no more Michelob laughter on tap at Duck Island, which is now a mortuary for a carousing man. The windows are all boarded up as they are down the street at Best Cafe, where late night talk regaled indiscreet. The world famous 12-egg omelet no longer has takers, and unemployment has claimed their cooks and waiters. On a nearby street, men saw off the gray limbs of an oak, while November drizzle dispels chronic veils of leaf smoke. Some can hear the hospital screams as the steel teeth enter the wood and sense the harbinger of a cold winter. Thank you. Well, I think since everyone's reading personal poems, I think I'll just was going to read one about Keats and another poem, but I think I'll read a poem I wrote last quarter. And this is sort of, it's about my older sister, and we both had different teddy bears, and then it goes on to some other things about baseball card collection. So if you can remember any baseball players from the 50s, I think that would really help here. I'm calling this childhood idols, and spell idols would be IDLES, because, when you're that young, you don't have a lot to do in the summertime. So it's not idols like IDYLLS, kind of a pun. Teddy Bricks, my one-time Ursine companion, slouched in a corner chair, his faded green vest and feathered Robin Hood cap askew. His metal limbs are old and twisted. When I wind him up, he can no longer execute his mechanical somersaults. Sad in disrepair, he communicates with my sister's bear, Teddy Beebe, who's grown pudgy and moth-eaten. Now they rest in the spent morning's shadows as I reach for my shoebox of baseball cards. I shuffle the smiles and stances of Walt Drobo, Elroy Face, Ted Klazuski, and Yogi Berra through my hands. After lunch, I go out to our backyard with my bat and rubber ball and pretend to be Gene Woodling, the only Baltimore Oriole batting over 260. I'm swinging for the fences 60 feet away and trying to hit that red orb all the way to Glen Burnie, a half mile away. Through the kitchen window, the coasters harmonize Young Blood, and that draws me out of the August Maryland swelter to drop a lemon lime fizzy in a glass of ice water. Refreshed, I look through my collection of rhythm and blues trading cards to see if I can find one of the coasters among Laverne Baker, Little Richard, and Elvis. At 12 years, I finally learned to ride a bicycle and pedal out with my friends to beaches on the Severn River. There I watched sails billow over glittering liquid blue towards the Chesapeake Bay. Thank you. Thank you. This is something I wrote just a couple weeks ago for a Hugo House class, and it's just an alter ego poem, but it's not your typical alter ego. It's just this is not somebody you would aspire to. It's actually my paternal grandfather. He was not a bad person; just had a lot of problems, and he was from a place called East Prussia, which was once Poland had it until about the late 18th century. Then Prussia got it, so it was called. So he was kind of a Germanic personality, and he kind of tended to give commands a lot. So that's just where he's coming from. So I call this Rudolph Revisited. It was the diminutive Rudolph insomnia waking me up at 3 a.m. with his New York accent, hectoring in the dark. What's wrong with you? I had turned in at 1 a.m. in the upstairs swelter of an Ohio July, after the sweaty hunting and pecking on a baby blue Olivetti in a vain attempt to finish a term paper on Joyce's Ulysses. By that time, I had only read half of the Rent-A-Character Leopold Bloom's monologuing of his employer's myopic whimsy. The next day, I arose with a headache at 6 a.m. as the egg yellow sun burned through the window, watering my eyes. An hour later, I began the drive up and down the Cincinnati hills towards the university, somehow tolerating the feel-good idiocy of Three Dog Night blasting joy to the world from the car radio. Yet I was still puzzled how the same person who wrote this asinine anthem also wrote The Pusher a few years before. Next up was Elton emoting Bernie's lyrics about a character rocketing to Mars, where he remembered he had forgotten to ask his wife if she wanted anything from the grocery store on the way home. How I wish the DJ would cue up the Beatles song, I'm Only Sleeping, since black-hearted jackdaws from a German neighborhood in Brooklyn were crying out a cacophony in my head. Meanwhile, Rudolph pointed out my ineptitudes in a voice that clackety-clacked like an approaching L train. Thank you. Okay, this is from assignment from last fall quarter in Hugo House, and we were supposed to write poems that ask questions. So I wrote a couple of letters to John Keats and John Clare, who we studied last quarter, both 19th century English poets. Now this is would be two halves, of course, Keats and Clare. Questioning poets, queries for Keats. Why did you walk through 25 miles of November rain in a flimsy springtime waistcoat, immune to thoughts insane? Did you think death was no more than a loud dream, an apparition murmuring of that not fully seen? But you knew it had arrived like the Italian sun in your fevered rooms in Rome of breathless consumption. Did you ever hear portents of the nightingale song that you wouldn't live to be Wordsworth's age or even half as long? This is a query for Clare. Why did birdsong stay in your head from Emmy's Heath, where night jars called and the hawk whistled like a thief? You didn't heed the cold-eyed men of science in London who peered through the sterile glass of the corpses of robins. Ignorant henchmen of commerce lived in that city, their blackthorn hearts icy towards avian poetry. How could they hear other bird tunes as nightingales' music, which you still heard within the walls that housed lunatics? Thank you. Yeah, this is something I wrote in December, and it's you could set it to the tune of The Water is Wide. I use the same syllable count. It's an old folk song. And First couple of lines are a reference to Shakespeare's Sonnet 73, where he's talking about the bare room choirs where late the sweet birds sang. And I call this COVID lament. Shakespeare's choirs are empty now. The songs flown south to Mexico, abandoning the Seattle sky, its November sun winking low. The air is deep with autumn's cold, and ravens cry out, passing time, in a convoluted black chorus, worrying the years in my mind. Milky coronas of headlights approach me this early dawn as I walked into the streets of COVID plague nearly 2 years on. It is a morning of blinding fog rising from my cotton face mask, turning the horizon to a haze and my thoughts to a solitary task. Further through the pandemic we go, peering at screens, losing bandwidth, adrift in our own domiciles, scrolling to varieties of death. Electronic images multiply as I shelter in pallid place of unredeemed isolation, infusing my dream-weary face. I ruminate this afternoon about children I'd seen this day, like ghost figures turning circles on bikes in a white disarray. I watch icy washes of sunlight on the building across the street as disembodied laughter makes the darkening hour complete. Thank you.